Watch the MatPat's latest FNAF Ruin prediction theory. Apparently, Burn Trap is Mimic, Glitch Trap is Mimic, Blob is Mimic, every Endo is Mimic, the entire building is Mimic, and Gregory is Mimic. I genuinely burst into laughter, dude. That was the funniest video he's ever done. I can't. When everything is Mimic, is anything really Mimic? Mimic is Mimic. What if the Mimic mimics a Mimic? Then it's a mimic mimicking a mimic that looks like a mimic. But what if the mimic mimicking a mimic that looks like a mimic was actually a different mimic trying to mimic that mimic mimicking a mimic? Then the mimic mimicked the wrong mimic. The lore implications here are wild. Indeed, but you forgot to mention about the mimic mimicking a mimic that looks like a mimic, but that mimic is actually the other mimic mimicking a mimic that looks like a mimic. What are your thoughts on the mimic mimicking a mimic that looks like a mimic and vice versa? Well, this implies that there are other mimics out there. If the mimic we saw in Ruin was actually a mimic mimicking a mimic, does that mean that a different mimic has had an interaction with Gregory? If so, that means the mimic mimicking a mimic is actually not mimicking a mimic! That is so mimicking true! Game theory, ID's fantasy, and FNAF all need to talk about this, to be honest. You forgot to mention the mimic. Nuh-uh, you forgot to mention Mexus. Okay, look here, you little mimic. I can't mimicking focus without you mentioning about the bloody mimic! It's about mimic, we stay mimic, and we do mimic. Put in a mimic, and put in a mimic. We take what's mimic. Oh, fuck.